Well, welcome. It's good to see you here. I didn't know when I left.
Okay. Yeah, good.
I didn't know when I left the house this morning if we'd see anybody, but I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. My name is Doug Brower, and I am a member of the Humanities Subcommittee of the Curriculum Committee, very important position. And our work is to bring you courses like the one you're here for today. Please take out your cell phones right now and ensure that they are silenced so as not to distract from today's presentation. Thank you for doing that. Also, welcome to all those of you who are joining via Zoom in the HASP virtual classroom. Special thanks to our course technician, Scott Travis, for supporting our hybrid modality. If you have any questions or comments to pose at the appropriate times, we kindly ask that you wait for the microphone, bring it around, and that way everybody, including those online, can hear your question or comment. We look forward to welcoming you to our monthly program, which is titled Music Unites Us. It's hosted next Tuesday, December 5 at 9:30 in the Jack Miller Center for the Arts. This program is a collaboration with the Holland Symphony Orchestra and will feature a live performance of traditional African music. And of course, coffee, cookies, and conversation begin at 9 o'clock. So, gives me pleasure to introduce our presenters today. These are two friends I've made since moving to Holland, and I'm glad to know them. Mark Hiskes is a retired English teacher who taught literature and writing for 40 years. His chief joy was gathering with students around a good story or poem, and like a symphony director, leading the daily discussions by helping each kid contribute.
It's the best metaphor I ever came up with. It's like, this is what I do.
He loves to read and write and has published a collection of poems called Standing with Alyosha.
Alyosha, yeah.
He also enjoys refurbishing old furniture with his wife, Cindy, which she then sells in her antique booth. They both love visiting their 3 grandchildren in Vermont and Virginia. Jeff's introduction is going to take about a half hour. He did supply me with a second one, but I'm going to read.
Read a little of my alternate introduction.
Okay, that one begins. Jeff Munroe is a friend to all and a noted humanitarian, and then it just gets worse from there. Right, but here's the real
shortstop for the Detroit Tigers. He wants you to know.
And 20 honorary degrees from various institutions. No, Jeff Munroe is editor of the Reformed Journal, a digital magazine which explores issues of faith and life from a generously reformed perspective. He's a graduate of Michigan State University, Western Theological Seminary, and an ordained minister in the Reformed Church in America. He served in the non-denominational youth ministry known as Young Life for 3 decades in West Michigan and in Europe, and served as executive vice president for Western Theological Seminary for close to a decade. He and his wife Gretchen live in Holland, Michigan, and are the parents of 2 adult children. And I'll just add by way of parenthesis here that he has a new book coming out. Oh, he has I missed that one entirely. His previous book is Reading Buechner, exploring the work of a master memoirist, novelist, theologian, and preacher. He has a new book coming out in January, which I've had the opportunity and privilege to read before publication. And its title is Telling Stories in the Dark, Finding Healing and Hope in Sharing Our Sadness, Grief, Trauma, and Pain. It's really good. I recommend it to you. I recommend both of these gentlemen to you.
Thanks, Doug. And I recommend his new book too. Yeah, I've had the honor of reading it as well, and it's really good. So how many of you are here because you like Ted Lasso? All right. How many because you're Anthony Trollope fans? All right. It's going to be lonely. Jeff was way ahead of me on reading Anthony Trollope. College, you first encountered Barsetshire Towers. I wanted to read him because an author we both love, Frederick Buechner, was a huge fan of Anthony Trollope. And I tried reading a number of times while I was in my career. But between papers and the novels I had to read and the ones I wanted to read on the side, every time I opened an Anthony Trollope, I thought, this is just going to take too long. It's too slow. It's too slow. I'm saving him for retirement. And so I did. And about 2 years ago, Jeff and I, when I retired, we started having breakfast on a regular basis and discovered that I was really enjoying Trollope, and he had already been enjoying him. And we both loved Ted Lasso. And then someone asked us to do a HASP, and I said, I think we should put those two together. And you kind of said, what? But it was something I always liked doing as a teacher, finding things that had something in common, and then with students trying to find all the things they might have had in common. And the more we talked, the more we both started finding all kinds of things. And so today's focus will be on one novel of Anthony Trollope's, but the whole series of books called the Barsetshire Chronicles, but one novel called The Warden, and then Ted Lasso. And we've sort of changed the title along the way, and it is now Ted Lasso, Trollope and Ted Lasso, Honoring the Holy Fool. And we both sort of came to the same conclusion. The lead character in the novel and Ted Lasso are both holy fools in the best sense of the word. And so I'll start. We'll be just alternating along the way. Feel free to interrupt and ask a question anytime. Okay. Anthony Trollope, the unknown giant of English literature. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but my guess is most of you have never been asked to read an Anthony Trollope novel. Some of you may know about him. Maybe you've read some of his novels. Can I just see how many? Okay, a few. Good. But I think he should be known as a giant of English literature. His father was a lawyer, very hard on the family, very difficult man, driven to work hard, hard on his kids. They tended to avoid him. He wasn't abusive, but they just didn't like being around him because he was so focused on his work and so focused on their time being well spent. He made sure they had the best education possible. He was adamant about that. Trollope probably had him in mind when he created one of his most memorable characters, and Jeff would agree with this, the Reverend Josiah Crawley. Is that correct? And he comes in a couple of the Barchester books. He's a pastor, but he's just a miserable man, just so devoted to his work that his kids find him difficult to be around. That was Trollope's dad. His mom was the exact opposite, a joy to be around. She started writing travel books and became rather famous for them, even wrote a few novels that Trollope himself thought weren't very good. But she was probably the influence behind him writing. He was kind of a late bloomer as a writer. But once he started, he did not stop until days before he died, many years later. Before he began to write regularly, he would create whole fictional worlds in his head. He would take long walks, and while he was working as a post office worker, which he spent his whole career doing, writing was always sort of his side job, amazingly. He would create these fictional worlds. He called it castle building. And you need to know that because when he would write, which would be very early in the morning, he likened it to dictation, where he was just writing down what he had already sort of constructed in his head. He's been compared by one critic to Tolkien because he creates such a realistic world in his novels. Prolific writer, over 12 million published words in his lifetime. Charles Dickens wrote 15 novels. Jane Austen, who I love, published 6 novels. Anthony Trollope published 47, as well as a series of travel books, collections of short stories, and other books. At his peak, he was almost averaging 3 novels a year. He was so prolific, it sort of worked against him because publishers said, you can't be putting another book out already. How can this already be ready? But he would get up early in the morning, write for 2 or 3 hours before going to whatever his postal job was, and produced so many novels, memorable novels at that. He thought Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice was the best novel of his time, and I think I would agree with that. His standards for fiction were a strong sense of morality, lifelike and natural characters, realistic behavior and dialogue, and believable, unsensational plots. And in that, he sort of worked against much of the writing of his time. His biographer, one of his biographers said this: I think that Trollope was more of an intellect than is usually recognized, that his genius, while capable of depicting tragic figures, was essentially a comic one, that he was a writer of care and judgment in spite of the fact that he seldom had to rewrite a line. And I think he himself, for all the satiric self-deprecation he practiced, knew he was one of the giants of English fiction. George Bernard Shaw, famous writer himself, wrote this: he delivered us from the marvels, the senseless accidents, cat's cradle plots of old romance, and gave us, to the best of his ability, a faithful picture of the daily life of the upper and middle classes. One critic wrote in 1968 that Trollope wrote better than he or his contemporaries realized, and left behind him more novels of lasting value than any other writer. And there are a lot of critics who have that opinion of Anthony Trollope. He should be more read than he is, and probably taught more than he is. The Warden is the first book in a series of 6 called the Barsetshire Chronicles. I think I have one more slide here. And someone made a wonderful little map of where the 6 novels take place, the settings, and exactly. But Barsetshire is, made up. It's like Tolkien's Middle Earth, and so the 6 novels all take place there. Those are the 6 novels we would recommend you begin any Trollope reading with. He's most famous for these. The Warden, followed by Barchester Towers, are probably his best known ones. I'm going to let Jeff take over and talk about lead character.
I will add a couple things about Trollope,
Please.
just as a writer that are well-known stories. Well, one as a writer. One is that he had this allotted time. I think it was like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. that he wrote before he went to his job at the post office. And the story is that if he was writing and wrote the end because he had finished a novel and it was 8:20 and he still had 40 minutes of writing time, he would put a piece of paper in the typewriter and write chapter 1 and start on the next one because he already had them in his head. And then the other thing about him that I think is fascinating is, for the post office, he invented the stand-alone post office box on street corners. Who knew, right? You didn't know that, but that's him.
Next time you mail a letter, think, I got to read an Anthony Trollope book.
Yes. So Mr. Harding is the main character of the book, The Warden, the one that we're going to focus on today. He is the protagonist of this story. He is what we call both a bit of a hobbit and a holy fool. He was the precentor, minor canon at Barchester Cathedral. The precentor is the person who basically led the congregational singing. And the position of warden was given to, was the option of the precentor. Now, it's a little complicated, but follow along with me. So if you had the job of precentor in the cathedral, which paid 80 pounds a year, you were given the option to be the warden or the caretaker of a hospital. They called it a hospital. It really was an old age home that had 12 men that lived in it. And the pay for that job was 800 pounds a year. So if you had this 80 pound a year job, you had the option of also taking plus a house, beautiful home that you lived in, taking that job. So the precentor of the Barchester Cathedral was always the warden of this, we call it an almshouse. They called it a hospital at the time. And this had been set up 400 years earlier through the will of a man named, it was called Hiram's Hospital. It was John Hiram, who was a wool stapler. Anyone know any wool staplers? Wool stapler was someone who was a wool dealer, and they could become very wealthy. And Hiram was a wealthy man, and he left his house and his property in his will in the 1400s for the care of 12, what they called superannuated. And really that's just fancy for, they could have been members of HASP. That's what that stands for, wool carders. So the house was built, or speakers. The house was built for them, a fitting residence for a warden with a salary from the rent of the property. Well, over 400 years, guess what happened? The property increased greatly in value, the rents. So what had been fields slowly began to have houses built on them. And so the amount of money coming in to this warden position went up and up and up until it's the point of being 800 pounds a year, which not everyone in town knew. They just knew that there was a nice income attached to it and tended to think maybe it was a fabulous, fantastic income attached to it. And so Trollope writes, the office of warden was one of the most coveted of the snug clerical sinecures, I think that's how you pronounce that word, attached to our church. So Mr. Harding, when he became the warden at age 50, he decided out of his own pocket to give an extra 2 pence a day to the 12 men. They all got an allowance. Their allowance added up to be about 20 pounds a year, but they had all their meals taken care of. They had the warden there to look after them. It was a nice place to be, but he, out of his own generosity, gave them an extra 2 pence a day, much to the objection of his the bishop's son and Mr. Harding's son-in-law, Dr. Grantley. And we'll talk about Archdeacon Grantley as we go, because he's a very interesting character in this. So at 60 years old, this is when this book takes place. He's had the position for 10 years. He's essentially like a hobbit, like Bilbo Baggins. Think of that if you're familiar with that story. He was a kind, humble widower who loved his 2 daughters, the elder of which was married to the archdeacon of the cathedral or of Barchester, I'm sorry. And then his younger daughter who lived with him. He was beloved by the 12 people he took care of. He enjoyed playing his cello. He was, they called him a friend of friends, and on occasion he would have a glass of sherry with the 12 almsmen. And whenever he's in a stressful situation, you would see him imaginary start to play his cello. That was his one kind of funny little habit. He is easily intimidated by his son-in-law, the Archdeacon of Barchester, but he is best friends with his son-in-law's father, the bishop. And the bishop also was very similar to Mr. Harding, loved a quiet, peaceful life. And at one point, Trollope says that neither Mr. Harding nor the bishop actually ran the, what do they call it? What was the right word? I can't think of the diocese, right? But they spent their time talking about the man who did, who was the archdeacon. So Trollope described Mr. Harding as open-handed, just-minded, never quite at ease in money matters. With his income, he should be above the world, but he is never above his son-in-law, Archbishop Theophilus Grantley, who more or less handles Mr. Harding's finances. And so Mr. Harding is a bit of what we call a holy fool. And we'll develop this more as we go, but there's a great article that Tish Harrison Warren wrote that was in the New York Times that compared Ted Lasso to the holy fool. We think Mr. Harding fits that description also. And she says in Russian Orthodox spirituality, a holy fool is a person who flouts social conventions to demonstrate allegiance to God, embracing humility and love. Holy fools are so profoundly out of step with the broader world that they appear to be ridiculous or even insane and often invite ridicule. And yet they teach us how to live. And then I have been brought up, I worked for Young Life for a long time. And Young Life, we did a lot of humor and a lot of skits. And one of the things that we like to reassure ourselves, because we'd be ridiculous, was that a fool for Christ is an honorable thing. And really, it's drawn out of a couple different verses from 1 Corinthians. We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. And Paul goes on there to say that the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of the world. And then in 1 Corinthians 4, Paul says, we are fools for Christ. And then he's actually being ironic as he's talking to the Corinthian people, because he says, but you are so wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are honored. We are dishonored. Saying that they're striving for notoriety or position in society is not the thing to strive for. That being a fool for Christ is the thing instead. Mark is going to take us into the world of Ted Lasso.
What you been waiting for?
This one has video, so Ted Lasso's more exciting because he has video.
And so Tish Harrison Warren's article was about how Ted Lasso is a holy fool. And as Jeff and I talked, we said, well, Mr. Harding is too. And Jeff's made a good case for that, and we'll continue to sort of make that comparison. But Ted Lasso definitely is that. I'm going to just play the trailer for it, for those of you who haven't seen it. And we will just start with that. Actually, I'll read this first by Margaret Rankel, a New York Times editorial writer that I read whenever she writes something. She said this: for 3 years, Ted Lasso became something like a national water cooler, a place where we could gather outside our departments and our hierarchies and our political bubbles to remember who we are, or at least who we still desperately want to be. Understood, forgiven, connected. And think back to that pandemic, and we're still not out of all of the stuff connected to that, but it really was just a balm for us, for those of us who watched. Here's a trailer just to connect you with the show a little bit.
Oi mate, there's you.
I believe it is.
Wicked. You coaching football. You are a legend for doing something so stupid. I mean, it's mental. They're gonna murder you.
This is a bit of news from the other side of the Atlantic. AFC Richmond announced the hiring of their new manager, American football coach Ted Lasso.
You're an American who's now in charge of a football club, despite possessing very little knowledge of the game.
Oh! I know that AFC Richmond is going to give you everything they got, win or lose.
Or tie.
Right, y'all do ties here. Did you see that? He must be from England, yeah? Wales. Is that another country?
Yes and no.
How many countries are in this country?
4. Like it or not, Richmond are changing the way we do things. And from now on, that way is the Lasso way.
Hey, look, this car's got an invisible steering wheel.
What you're doing is irresponsible. This club actually means something to this town.
You don't think I see that every day out there on the streets?
Are you kidding me?
I think that's what it's all about. Embracing change.
Same thing!
Being brave.
Your decision to bench Jamie was a masterstroke.
I don't think we're allowed to talk like that at work anymore. For me, success is not about the wins and losses. It's about helping these young fellas be the best versions of themselves on and off the field. I always figured that tea was just going to taste like hot brown water. And you know what? I was right. Yeah, it's horrible. No, thank you.
Welcome to England.
Okay, let's stop that there for now. So Ted Lasso was a successful college football coach in America. He went through a divorce. Well, not a divorce yet, a separation first, and kind of threw him for a loop. He had a son that he loved dearly and still loved his wife, and so took this job in Richmond, which is a suburb of London, as a football coach. He was a football coach in America, like we know football, but went to become a soccer coach in Richmond. He knew nothing about it. At one point, he says, you could fill 2 internets with what I don't know about football. And it's true. But he gets people. He gets people. And that's the charm and the success of the show. He comes off as innocent, very motivational. Each morning, and this became a national phenomenon, each morning he walks into his boss's office, Rebecca, with a little pink box filled with 3 bars, cookies, he said, but y'all call them biscuits here in England. And so he brings them to her, and she, does not want to touch them, but her first bite, and she's just in love with these cookies. Every day he brings them to her. Those recipes have gone viral on the internet. Eventually, everyone seems to warm up to Ted, but he's losing. His assistant, Coach Beard, who has a beard, knows a lot about football in England and is managing as best he can, but they're not doing very well as a team. The fans turn on him terribly. They can't stand what's happening to their beloved AFC Richmond, the Greyhounds. And so they're just ruthless. When he walks out on the field, they start chanting, and I won't tell you what they chant, but they do. And, he's not even sure what it means, but and they see him on the street. And we have to be honest, the language in Ted Lasso is pretty rough. And I have argued with those who criticized it by saying, I think it has to be. Otherwise, he would just seem to inhabit an unreal world. The show wouldn't be realistic without some of the language that he uses. So the plot is, though, that his new boss, Rebecca, has recently taken over as owner and manager of Richmond, the Greyhounds. Her husband, who divorced her, Rupert, is just an awful person. At least that's the impression we have throughout most of the episodes. He just is ruthless. He marries a younger woman, and he just wants Rebecca to fail. And so she does what she thinks will hurt him most. She hires Ted Lasso to destroy the Greyhounds, to be such an awful coach that Rupert's pride and joy, this team, will just be ruined. Ted, of course, knows nothing of that. He is a holy fool, in a sense. Tish Warren says a few things about him that we want you to see.
Oi, mate, there's you.
I believe it again.
Wicked. You coaching football.
Sorry. Let's see. How do I advance it? Here we go. She says, the so-called foolishness of holy fools is tethered to their spiritual insight. They offer a change of perspective. What appears normal and successful in the world is revealed by the fool to be hollow, vain, and pointless. What appears foolish, it turns out, is the true path of flourishing. Above all, a holy fool is an icon for radical humility. And this is where Lasso most clearly embodies this persona, that radical humility that we'll talk about again. Nope, this is not working quite right. Let's go. It's not advancing. Say it again. Well, might have to. Norm, any thoughts? I'm trying each thing here. Pros. There we go. Oh, yeah, good. Okay. And then the second quote, there's a kind of magic at work. Thanks. There's a kind of magic at work in Ted Lasso's life. When everyone else seems to be carried along by the powerful riptides of ambition, vanity, fame, jadedness, and contempt, it startles us when someone swims upstream against the current. The Catholic social activist Dorothy Day ends her memoir, The Long Loneliness, with one of my favorite lines. Warren writes, "We have all known the long loneliness, and we have learned that the only solution is love that comes with community." Lasso carries around an aching loneliness, that separation from his wife and son. Yet his incessant, childlike faith in people, his foolishness, allows Ted to lavish love on those around him. In an interview with Trent Crimm early in the series, Ted looks the journalist in the eyes and says, "I really enjoyed getting to spend this time with you." Crimm is taken aback. He replies, flummoxed, "You actually mean that, don't you?" Jeff.
Yeah, well, what I would say about that is really the setup in Ted Lasso is, in some ways, the question is, will the jadedness and cynicism of the AFC Richmond world take this holy fool Ted Lasso and make him jaded and cynical? Or will somehow this one person going into this jaded and cynical system transform that system? That's really the question. And is he going to find out that his boss has set him up for failure? What's he going to do when he finds that out? So those are some of the questions. So to go back to, let's look at these two British settings. Barchester, I'm going to talk about Barchester for a minute, and then about Richmond. I want to say that, well, first off, one of the things that sometimes I think you need as you read Trollope, and this was certainly the case when I read it in college, is you need a glossary of all these Anglican church terms to keep in mind. So a cathedral, when you have a cathedral, and Barchester is a cathedral town, when you have a cathedral, and you learn this if you go to Europe and go around and look at the great cathedrals of Europe, every cathedral means that it is the house or the home of a bishop. So you have Westminster Abbey is not a cathedral. Did you ever wonder why Westminster Abbey is not a cathedral? It's because it's not the home of a bishop, whereas Salisbury or St. Paul's, yeah, are cathedrals. So a cathedral is where a bishop is. A canon is a clergyman belonging to the staff of a cathedral. A precentor leads the congregation in singing. So Mr. Harding is both a canon and the precentor. And then the archdeacon, who's the other big character another big character in this book, is a priest to whom the bishop delegates responsibility. So the archdeacon has his own place called Plumstead, but he also does a lot of the management of the whole diocese. So the plot of The Warden is based in fact. It is based in reality of things that were going on in England at the time. So when the Whig Party ascended beginning in the 1830s, the Whigs were the forerunner of the modern Liberal Party. And the Whigs set their sights on one of the things that they stood for was reforming the church, and reforming particularly these positions that existed in the church where people had fantastic incomes. And so in the book, Trollope refers to St. Cross Hospital. He refers also to a Mr. Whitson at Rochester. Both of those are factual things that his readers would have been aware of. Whitson and the Rochester Cathedral Grammar School became a famous case beginning in 1848 of charitable misappropriation and clerical greed. And the endowment had grown over 3 centuries, but the amount paid to the poor students had not. And so the British humor magazine Punch took up that case, and Mr. Whitson was actually the whistleblower. He's referred to repeatedly throughout the Warden. And then the case of St. Cross Hospital is very similar. Hiram's Hospital is really modeled on the story of St. Cross Hospital. The warden of St. Cross at that time was Francis North. He was appointed by his father, who was the Bishop of Winchester, Brownlow North. He was the brother of the Prime Minister, Frederick Lord North, who was a prime minister under King George III during the American Revolution. Upon his death in 1820, Bishop North was receiving an annual income of £28,000, which is equivalent to $1 million today. That's a lot for a bishop, right? So Trollope takes this familiar story and then makes it more complex, because Mr. Harding is a lot more nuanced and morally courageous than the warden of St. Cross. Dr. Grantley, the archdeacon, at one point accuses Mr. Harding of not having courage, when in fact, Mr. Harding's courage is what drives this story. One of the things, I'm going to come back to this later, but this is George Orwell writing about the warden. He said one of the lessons of this story is that a time-honored abuse is better than its remedies. That's also that's a little bit of an ironic juxtaposition, like we're talking about holy fools, or a juxtaposition. I'll come back to that. Whoops, that's your slide, Mark. Mark and I, neither of us, it may not be obvious, but neither of us are PowerPoint pros. I mean, really. So anyway, a couple more things I want to say. Trollope makes clear that in the church, there's more emphasis on power and money than on Christian righteousness. And at one point, he says of Dr. Grantley, he did not believe in the gospel with more assurance than he did in the sacred justice of all ecclesiastical revenues. And then at another point, and this is why I'm weird, but I read Trollope and I just start laughing out loud because I think it's so funny. This is another line where he's talking about church revenue. And he said, who among us could lie basking in the cloisters of Salisbury and gaze on Jewel's library and that unequaled spire without feeling that sometimes bishops should be rich? And then another big element in this story is the role of the press, represented by a newspaper called The Jupiter, which sees itself as a reformer and as an enemy of the church. And the press is a law unto itself. And Trollope really skewers the press also in this story. He is no fan of crusading journalists, no fan of reform, really. And one of the great lines that Dr. Grantley says as they discuss, because the Jupiter breaks this story about the warden and about his income and how big it is. Dr. Grantley says, no man can answer the Jupiter. And that actually is true today. When you are smeared in the press, how do you can't answer it.
It's over.
Yeah, when I worked at Western Seminary and we were facing something difficult, I went to a meeting with a professional public relations person, and he told me the rule of thumb is the person who breaks the story owns the story. So you better get your bad news out before somebody else can say it. Because if you get it out, you have some sort of control over it. If somebody else gets it out, it's out of your control. And that's what happens in this story. So Mark's going to talk about Richmond, where the Ted Lasso is set.
So it's not unusual, to think that the church gets more caught up in power and wealth than in righteousness. That was true then. We obviously still see signs of that today. And so that similarity is also present in Richmond, where it's about winning, not people. I used to play basketball, and my mother, who I've never thought of her this way, but she definitely was a holy fool in the way she just went against everything. Whenever my head would get too big or I'd take basketball too seriously, she would just look at me and say, "It's only a game, Mark. Now go do what I told you to do," or something like that. It's only a game. And in the world of professional sports today, of course, the game aspect is lost. It becomes almost a religion, a motivational for life. Michigan last Saturday, I had fun watching that game too, but think of how large sports loom in our culture. And of course, that was true in Richmond. It was all about winning and power, not about the character of the athlete, not about pleasing the fans, not about developing these young men and young women into better versions of themselves. Ted Lasso challenges all of that. Here too, just as in the Warden, they had the Jupiter, almost every episode ends at some point, he's in front of the press corps, who is brutal to him, especially in the beginning. What's so fun about this show is that over time, they start loving this guy and just waiting for his responses. And, he'll start tossing out not a cliche, but a pun or two, and they'll start picking up on it, and they want to get it right so that they've connected with Ted. It's the Lasso way that they learn, and that's what I just want to show you here with a little clip, the Ted Lasso way that they adopt. That's just so...
Hey! Ted Lasso welcome wagon has arrived.
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is an injection of goodness.
I'm fine.
The level of thanks that comes across social media. Imagine getting tweets from people saying, "We are kinder to each other in our family because you've reminded us that that's what we should all be."
It's a choice, isn't it, to be positive and grateful. And I now find myself saying, "I appreciate you" to most people after an interaction.
This is why it's hard to love you.
Oh, he loves you.
The positivity that people have felt about the show and talking about the kind of Lasso way, being very funny, but also very human, it's undeniable.
Keep an eye on these guys, because around the 74-minute mark, there's going to be a room full of grown men crying.
I'll be one of them.
Every man and woman is living a comedy, a drama, and a tragedy, and the messages reflect that notion.
Speaking with people and the fans and the reactions changed my life. I was walking and randomly a person just started screaming, "Football is life, football is life."
Football is life.
Someone who messaged me on Twitter said their 11-year-old son missed a shot that would have tied the game. And she's like, "Right, I know you're upset, but what do we need to do?" And he goes, "Be a goldfish like Sam."
Do you remember what animal has the shortest memory?
The goldfish.
What do you think we should all do once we get done being sad?
I think we should all be a goldfish.
I brought you a little something.
Oh.
Yeah, cookies. Or, as y'all call them here, biscuit.
Getting a lot of biscuit recipes. People going, "Oh, look at these that we made," or little videos of them going, "Oh my God, they taste as good as yours." And who knew that that whole biscuits with the boss thing would go so nuts?
I forgive you.
Why?
Divorce is hard. It makes folks do crazy things. Some of the more profound responses that have reached me personally have been from people going through things that characters have gone through on the show, or just something that's really taken hope out of their hearts, and how the show moved them in a way that refilled their love cup, so to speak.
Oh, it feels good to laugh.
And season 2 is even better.
Season 2 stays as adorable as the first.
How long does that have?
Doesn't matter. You're back now.
Let's do this.
So both of those worlds have sort of power structures that are askew. Mr. Harding challenges his, and Ted challenges his, and that's what we want to focus on next.
So, in Mr. Harding's world,
Great.
a young man named John Bold, who is a gentleman. He's a surgeon, trained as a surgeon, but he's a gentleman, so he doesn't have to work. He has an income, and he is a reformer and an activist in that world. He also happens to be in love with Mr. Harding's younger daughter, but he learns of the situation regarding the will and the hospital and the income of the warden. And he goes to Mr. Harding and tells him that he doesn't think it is right, that he is going to investigate it, and he's going to seek legal means to remedy this situation. He has obviously no ill will against Mr. Harding, who's probably going to be his father-in-law one day, but his passion for reform of what he sees as an injustice leads him to file a lawsuit against the cathedral and against the warden. And when Mr. Harding learns of it, his response is, my response would have been, what are you, nuts? You're going to marry my daughter. What are you doing? Right? That would have been my response. His response is simply to say, do what you need to do what your conscience tells you to do. And Mr. Harding, much more than that, is mortified by the idea that he is taking money that he shouldn't be taking, that he has taken money for a decade that he shouldn't be taking. And so he is willing to give it all up, the job of warden, the comfortable home, the income, just to be simply left to live his quiet life with a clear conscience. He would rather accept poverty. He talks about that he will sell all of his furniture to get by. He would rather accept that than to be seen as wrong. Trollope's narrator tells us that he was not so anxious to prove himself right as to be right. And as the story develops, they actually wind up going to Dr. Grantley, leads them to lawyers. Dr. Grantley leads them to the Attorney General of England, who has the beautiful Anthony Trollope name of, I want to get this
Abraham.
Right. Abraham. I mean, yes, Abraham Haphazard is the attorney. Trollope has great names. One of my favorite names in all of Trollope. He's a very minor character in this. He comes in some of the other Barset books. He is a man with a clergyman with 13 children, and he's called Mr. Quiverful. So I just love the humor of the name. So what they find out from Sir Abraham Haphazard is that John Bold and the lawsuit that he has is wrong, not on its merits, but on a technicality of the way that it's done. And so this satisfies Dr. Grantley. This satisfies the bishop. Everything's going to be fine. The case can't be won. It does not come close to satisfying Mr. Harding. He doesn't want to win on a technicality. He wants to either win or leave his position. So he tells Bold, when Bold brings that up, do what you have to do. And I think there's a similarity to Ted Lasso here. Events around them are going on that they have no control over, that are kind of over their head. And there's great temptation to be manipulated by those events. And yet both Mr. Harding and Ted Lasso have a core integrity to them that refuses to be manipulated, that refuses to give in to the pressure around them. And Mr. Harding is very, very open to forgiving those who have wronged him. You're going to talk about
we'll just read a scene.
passage. Yeah.
So this passage takes place near the end of the book. This is actually 2 books. That's why it doesn't look like I'm at the end, but near the end of the book where Mr. Harding just has to know for himself whether he has any justification in being in the position he's in. He doesn't know that they've already behind the scenes dropped the suit because Mr. Bold was asked by Mr. Harding's daughter, Eleanor, to do so, and he desperately wants to marry Eleanor. So Mr. Bold drops the suit. It's all sort of done and over with, but he doesn't know that. And so he sneaks away to London. He knows if his son-in-law, the Archdeacon, knew he was going, he would tell him not to, because he wants to go and get advice for himself. And so he waits and waits, spends 2 days in London trying to get into Abraham Haphazard's office, finally manages to do so. We'll pick it up there near the end of the chapter. So he says to Abraham Haphazard, and again, he's just found out that the suit has been dropped. He didn't know that. He says, I know I have no right to trouble you personally with this matter, but as it is of most vital importance to me, as all my happiness is concerned in it, I thought I might venture to seek your advice. Sir Abraham bowed and declared his clients were entitled to the best advice he could give them, particularly a client so respectable in every way as the warden of Barchester Hospital. A spoken word, Sir Abraham, is often of more value than volumes of written advice. The truth is, I'm ill satisfied with this matter as it stands at present. I cannot help seeing that the affairs of the hospital are not arranged according to the will of the founder. None of such institutions are, Mr. Harding, nor can they be. The altered circumstances in which we live do not admit of it. Quite true. That is quite true. But I can't see that those altered circumstances give me a right to $800 a year. I don't know whether I ever read John Hiram's will, but were I to read it now, I could not understand it. What I want you, Sir Abraham, to tell me is this. Am I, as warden, legally and distinctly entitled to the proceeds of the property after the maintenance of the 12 beadsmen? Sir Abraham declared that he couldn't exactly say so in so many words, that Mr. Harding was legally entitled to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and ended in expressing a strong opinion that it would be madness to raise any further question on the matter, as the suit was to be, nay, was already abandoned. And then here's this. Mr. Harding, seated in his chair, began to play a slow tune on an imaginary cello. He doesn't even realize he's doing it. Nay, my dear sir, continued the Attorney General, there is no further ground for any question. I don't see that you have the power of raising it. I can resign, said Mr. Harding, slowly playing away with his right hand as though the bow were beneath the chair in which he was sitting. What? Throw it up altogether? Said the Attorney General, gazing with utter astonishment at his client. Did you see those articles in the Jupiter? Said Mr. Harding, piteously appealing to the sympathy of the lawyer. Sir Abraham said he had seen them. This poor little clergyman, cowed into such an act of extreme weakness by a newspaper article, was to Sir Abraham so contemptible an object that he hardly knew how to talk to him as to a rational being. So the person who is so respectable in Sir Abraham's opinion at the beginning is already this contemptible character. And now we'll go on to the end. Have you not a daughter, Mr. Harding? So he's trying to change his opinion. Have you not a daughter, Mr. Harding, an unmarried daughter? I have, said he, now standing also, but still playing away on his fiddle with his hand behind his back. I have, Sir Abraham, and she and I are completely agreed on this subject. Pray, excuse me, Mr. Harding, if what I say seems impertinent, but surely it is you that should be prudent on her behalf. She is young and does not know the meaning of living on an income of £150 a year. On her account, give up this idea. Believe me, it is sheer nonsense. The warden walked away to the window and then back to his chair, and then, irresolute what to say, took another turn to the window. The Attorney General was really extremely patient, but he was beginning to think that the interview had been long enough. But if this income be not justly mine, what if she and I have both to beg? Said the warden at last, sharply, and in a voice so different from what he had hitherto used that Sir Abram was startled. If so, it would be better to beg. My dear sir, nobody now questions its justness. Yes, Sir Abraham, one does question it. The most important of all witnesses against me. I question it myself. My God knows whether or no I love my daughter, but I would sooner that she and I both should beg than that she should live in comfort on money which is truly the property of the poor. It may seem strange to you, Sir Abraham, it is strange to myself, that I should have been 10 years in that happy home and not have thought of these things till they were so roughly dinned into my ears. I cannot boast of my conscience when it required the violence of a public newspaper to awaken it. But now that it is awake, I must obey it. When I came here, I did not know that the suit was withdrawn by Mr. Bold, and my object was to beg you to abandon my defense. As there is no action, there can be no defense. But it is, at any rate, as well that you should know that from tomorrow I shall cease to be the warden of the hospital. My friends and I differ on this subject, Sir Abraham, and that adds much to my sorrow, but it cannot be helped. And as he finished what he had to say, he played up such a tune as never before had graced the chambers of any attorney general. He was standing up, gallantly fronting Sir Abraham, and his right arm passed with bold and rapid sweeps before him, as though he were embracing some huge instrument which allowed him to stand thus erect. And with the fingers of his left hand, he stopped with preternatural velocity a multitude of strings which ranged from the top of his collar to the bottom of the lappet of his coat. Sir Abraham listened and looked in wonder, as he had never before seen Mr. Harding. The meeting of these wild gesticulations was lost upon him, but he perceived that the gentleman who had a few minutes since been so subdued as to be unable to speak without hesitation was now impassioned, nay, almost violent. You'll sleep on this, Mr. Harding, and tomorrow I have done more than sleep upon it, said the warden. I have laid awake upon it, and that night after night I found I could not sleep upon it. Now I hope to do so. The Attorney General had no answer to make to this, so he expressed a quiet hope that whatever settlement was finally made would be satisfactory, and Mr. Harding withdrew, thanking the great man for his kind attention. Mr. Harding was sufficiently satisfied with the interview to feel a glow of comfort as he descended into the small old square of Lincoln's Inn. It was a calm, bright, beautiful night, and by the light of the moon, even the chapel of Lincoln's Inn and the somber row of chambers which surrounded the quadrangle looked well. He stood still a moment to collect his thoughts and reflect on what he had done and was about to do. He knew that the Attorney General regarded him as little better than a fool, but that he did not mind. He and the Attorney General had not much in common between them. He knew also that others, whom he did care about, would think so too. But Eleanor, his daughter, he was sure, would exult in what he had done, and the bishop, he trusted, would sympathize with him. So if he has the love and support and trust of his daughter and his buddy, the bishop, that's enough. They can all laugh at him. He's a fool.
Don't you want to read Anthony Trollope after that?
I
Isn't
hope
that
so.
beautiful? So beautifully written. Uh-oh.
Yep. Here we go again. Oh, there you go.
Whoa.
That's the end of what I just read.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah, better than.
Yeah,
cool.
yes, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Ted Lasso, makes it clear that winning is not the priority. Success is about helping people be the best version of themselves on and off the field. I believe you can outscore your opponent and still lose, just like you can score less than them and win. He tells the team prima donna, who's a character named Jamie Tart, Jamie, I think that you might be so sure that you're 1 in a million that sometimes out there you forget that you're just 1 in 11. And Ted Lasso shows us what's possible when we give up winning. Soccer games, power grabs, professional success, culture wars, or online fights. And however foolish it may be, choose to root for the people all around us. That's a quote from Tish Harrison Warren's article in the New York Times. So we're going to touch on some things that we think they have in common: the humor, the satire, and great characters. And I think you're up first on the humor, Mark.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay.
It says right here on my notes that you're up.
Mine says
What's
Jeff.
it say in yours? No.
We did rehearse, but I think that's where I messed up. So we can do this. We can do this. Yes,
Yeah.
I say Jeff, you say Mark.
Yeah.
All right. We got this, Jeff. We got this. So the humor, first of all, one of the things I love about Trollope, and Jeff, I'm sure does too, is his narrator. You get a narrator who's like a character in the story. He's funny. He intrudes all the time. In one of the novels, I'm not sure which one, the second or third, there's a chapter of introduction. Okay, every book has that. And so you get to the second chapter and he begins, "My dear reader, I know you don't want another chapter setting the setting for this story," something to that effect. "But for this story, it's just so necessary." So he tells you, here comes another chapter of background to make the story work. He does that often, and I have several examples, but I think I'll just give one real short one where the narrator intrudes. Something that doesn't happen in Ted Lasso, of course. Here, beginning of chapter 8. "The reader must now be requested to visit the rectory of Plumstead Episcopi, and as it is yet still early morning, to ascend again with us into the bedroom of the archdeacon. The mistress of the mansion was at her toilet." That would explain to students that word used to mean the table with all the toiletries on it. "On which we will not dwell with profane eyes, but proceed into a small inner room where the doctor dressed and kept his boots and sermons, and here we will take our stand, premising that the door of the room was so open as to admit of a conversation between our Reverend Adam and his valued Eve." So you get this little discussion in the bedroom between them, and he breaks in all through the story, and it lightens it up. It bothers some people. He'll even break in and say, now you think, ladies," he'll address the ladies when Eleanor is talking about not falling in love with Mr. Bold when he comes, and she's going to tell him to drop the suit. And she's determined to ask him to drop the suit, not as a promise that she will then marry him, but she's going to do it as a sacrifice. And he says something like, "Now, ladies, you need to understand, someone this young will take a little different attitude toward this." And he's just forever commenting on what he's about to tell you. So there's the humor in Trollope. He's got all the names. Mr. Bold happens to be the character who intrudes on his father-in-law's life. Dr. Pessimist Anticant, which is, and I can't remember much about the character, but he's satirizing Thomas Carlyle, a philosopher of the time. And then he has another character named Mr. Sentiment, who he doesn't like much either. And that's a satirization of Charles Dickens, who was probably his chief competition as a novelist of the time. When the bishop hears that Mr. Bold is Eleanor's suitor, Trollope tells us The bishop did not whistle. We believe they lose the power of doing so on being consecrated, but he looked as though he would have done so but for his apron. At one point, Trollope says Mr. Harding looked at the archdeacon, his son-in-law, Dr. Grantley, and felt like a bird fascinated by gazing on a snake. Ted Lasso is just full of puns and jokes. You going to take that?
Yeah.
That's where we got mixed up.
So at one point, I'm going to give you a few Ted Lasso jokes. At one point, Coach Beard says that the players are stuck in their pineapple percussions. And amazingly, Ted Lasso gets it. He says, the doldrums. Think about that one, right? Then Ted learns that the team's ownership includes some sisters who have the last name of Milk. And Ted Lasso goes off on the Milk sisters. He says he could skim the back room. He promises that he'll be an utter gentleman around them. He wonders if they've seen the movie Bridget Jones' Dairy. At another point, he says, I should not bring an umbrella to a brainstorm. And I've got this, I brought this show and tell, this whole Ted Lasso calendar with me, which is full of little Ted Lasso living in the moment as a gift. That's why they call it the present, y'all. Smells like potential in here. And then they like the way that the British use the word boot, right? So he says, I got the boot, putting the boot in the boot. The boot is the trunk of your car. Yeah. So Sam, we've already seen that about the animal with the shortest memory to be a goldfish. This is something he says to Rebecca once. She says something and he says, if that's a joke, I love it. If not, I cannot wait to unpack that with you. Anyway, there's just great humor through the whole thing. I have a hard time hearing people who don't believe in themselves. Another great Lasso-ism.
We should probably hustle through the.
Yeah, I'm trying to hustle.
Through the next two, just kind of touch on them maybe.
I think you're up.
The satire.
Satire is you.
So Trollope satirizes the church. He also satirizes the press, which Lasso does as well with the prima donna athletes that like Jamie Tart. He satirizes the sport and also sort of satirizes the press. Then we get to characters, and maybe we'll talk briefly about characters. We both love Frederick Buechner, and I taught Godric for years when I was teaching English. And Buechner loved Trollope, and I'm convinced it's because Trollope did something that he always did with his characters. Buechner has Godric say at one point in the book, nothing human's not a broth of false and true. Nothing human isn't like a soup containing good things and bad things, true things and lies. Everything human is a mixed bag. None of us is perfect. None of us is wholly evil. And that's characteristic of Trollope's novels too. His narrator seems to sympathize with every character he's created. Even Archdeacon Grantley, before he leaves the scene of the Warden, Trollope gives us several paragraphs saying, now, I've only shown you the bad part of Dr. Grantley, but he really does have some very good qualities. He's a good man. But for this story, I could only show you the bad stuff.
And in Ted Lasso, if you search for a villain, your search will be in vain. At first, you think it might be Rupert, right? The former owner of the team who's divorced Rebecca. But as things go on, you learn so much about Rupert, about his very sad childhood, that you feel sympathy for him. Jamie Tart, the star player, is a great heel, a real jerk. But then you learn that he has a tyrannical father who has bullied him. And Ted really comes to his aid. And in many ways, there's a lot of father-son stuff that goes on and on. In the second season, Nate, who is the assistant coach, becomes the coach of a rival team. you think he's going to be the villain, but the third season is all about the redemption of Nate. So there's not ever a true villain.
Which is a great lead to our, pretty much our last point. And that is the themes. Both stories portray timeless and very timely themes. The first is what holy fools teach us. And so I want to begin with Mr. Harding, who after he steps down from his role as the warden, in the 12 men that he oversees, these almsmen, these poor men, most of them have turned against him. They want that money that they think might be coming toward them. And so they sort of join in, the drive to get rid of Mr. Harding, except one who's a loyal friend, Mr. Bunce, a loyal friend to Mr. Harding. But before he leaves the hospital, he gathers all these men together and pours them all a glass of sherry. And he has a few things to say. And this is his final blessing to them, these men who, for the most part, have wronged him. God bless you all. You have my heartfelt wishes for your welfare. I hope you may live contented and die trusting in the Lord Jesus Christ and thankful to Almighty God for the good things he has given you. God bless you, my friends. Mr. Harding's last words to the almsmen. And then Ted Lasso. We could choose a lot of scenes, but this might be my all-time favorite scene from Ted Lasso. It's the dart game. You can
warning, language warning.
There's a little language in here, yes. And
I'm sorry, you didn't learn the word.
You want to leave?
Don't give him satisfaction.
You want to leave?
Don't give him satisfaction.
So, Rebecca, it's time to be friends again. Especially since Bex and I are going to be sitting with you every week in that owner's box.
I'm not going every week.
Well, I am. And every week when they shove a camera in my face and ask me how I think you're doing, I will tell them it'll be relentless.
So, Rupert, y'all take your darts over here pretty seriously, huh? This and, what's the billiard game y'all do that sounds like a brand of cookies?
Snooker?
That's it. That's the one. Yeah, boy, I'd love to curl up on a couch under a weighted blanket, watch You've Got Mail, and devour a box of Snookers. See what we got here. Hey, there it is.
Do you like darts, Ted?
Oh, they're okay. I'm more of a, a cornhole man myself. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. How about a game? I mean, we could, maybe wager, say, £10,000?
Well, as my doctor told me when I got addicted to fettuccine Alfredo, that's a little rich for my blood. How about this? If you win, I'll let you pick the starting lineup of the last 2 games of the season. But if I win, you can't go anywhere near the owner's box, at least not while Rebecca's still in charge.
Ted, what the hell are you doing?
Well, I believe some folks call it white knighting, but I don't know. I'm just following my gut here. It's okay. So, no, what do you think?
You're on.
Okay.
Double in, double out.
Whatever you say, Rupert Dupes. Yeah. Just let me know if I'm winning or losing, all right?
Oh, I forgot I had these on me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wait a second. I forgot I'm left-handed. Oh.
180! William Rupert, get in! Shut your stupid little twat mouth or I will shut it for you.
Shall I be giving you the lineup card now, Ted? I shall be putting your Basanya back on defense where he belongs.
That's exactly what I said, didn't I?
No, it's not all Ted's fault. My ex-wife's the one who brought the hillbilly to our shores. I know she's always been a bit randy, but I never thought she would fuck over an entire team.
Hey! Better manners when I'm holding a dart. Please. May, what do I need to win?
2 triple 20s and a bullseye.
Good luck.
You know, Rupert, guys have underestimated me my entire life. And for years, I never understood why. It used to really bother me. But then one day, I was driving my little boy to school, and I saw this quote by Walt Whitman. It was painted on the wall there. It said, "Be curious, not judgmental." I like that. So I get back in my car and I'm driving to work, and all of a sudden it hits me. All them fellas that used to belittle me, not a single one of them were curious. You know, they thought they had everything all figured out, and so they judged everything, and they judged everyone. And I realized that they're underestimating me. Who I was had nothing to do with it. Because if they were curious, they would ask questions. You know? Questions like, have you played a lot of darts, Ted? Which I would have answered, yes, sir. Every Sunday afternoon at a sports bar with my father from age 10 until I was 16 when he passed away. Barbecue sauce. Good game, Ruben.
Come on, let's go.
You are a very lovely consolation prize. Rebecca, Ted, enjoy your evening.
Mate, as always.
Holy shit, that felt good.
That was fun, yeah. Only one thing left to do now.
What's that? Do I have to? Drinks are on me!
Get us back. Oh, God. Oh, no.
Freezes after videos.
I would try that, yeah. Oh, no.
I did.
Yeah, we did that. Hit it again.
Sorry.
You know, neither of us were curious enough about the technology. And you all are judging.
Norm Hookster over there used to work with me. He's smiling because he used to help me at moments like this.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah. Humility makes a difference. A quote from Psychology Today. Ted is outgoing and easily establishes himself as a coach style personality, but he also doesn't hesitate to take a back seat when he needs to as well. He is appropriately deferential to his higher ups and also to the talent and advice of his players, and even unexpectedly to the lowest ranking members of the staff, because he knows what the guy tells him makes sense. The advice helps the team score a much needed goal. So Ted models humility throughout. We're going to go on to
let's do it.
we're running out of time, so I want to say one thing before you do that, and then you can just wrap it up. Okay.
Well,
I'll leave. I know
yes,
I've got,
just
because we
enough
have some time
You
for
bet.
question
Yep.
and answer.
Let's do it.
But one thing I want to say is about why. So Jason Sudeikis is the man who plays Ted Lasso, and he's the creator of not only the character but of the show, and why Jason Sudeikis did this. His previous to doing Ted Lasso, he'd been a cast member for several years on Saturday Night Live, and then he made a movie called We're the Millers with Jennifer Aniston, where it was a movie where they presented themselves and they had a couple kids in the movie as a typical middle-class American family. One, in fact, they were a family of criminals that were going around just doing horrible things. And Jason Sudeikis reached a point looking at our world and our culture and the way we are broken and polarized and said, we don't need any more snark. We don't need any more characters like I have played throughout my career. What we need is goodness. What we need is somebody who teaches people about forgiveness. What we need is genuine humanity. And so out of that, they created this remarkable show, Ted Lasso, which became, as Mark mentioned, during the pandemic especially, just a beacon to so many people about goodness, about forgiveness, about how to live a decent life in relationship to other people. So that's what I was going to say for my closing.
So we'll end on forgiveness then.
Yeah.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So at the end of the Warden, Mr. Harding has all of his almsmen gathered around him, and he has blessed them. This is actually before his blessing, and they're sipping their wine, and they're feeling pretty low. This good good man is leaving in part because of their greed. And he knows that. And we don't need any more snark, Harding says at this point. What we need is a genuine, humble human being. And so Mr. Harding says this to these men: if any man has been wrong, and I don't say any man has, he has erred through wrong advice. In this country, all are entitled to look for their own rights, and you have done no more. Ted Lasso could have said that. Ted Lasso could have. But we want to end with a really wonderful scene from Ted Lasso about forgiveness. Tish Harrison Warren writes, Lasso's great humility again and again makes him a wellspring of transformation and redemption. Watch this scene from season 1 where Ted's owner apologizes to him for trying to undermine his success as a coach. And we'll just see. We can do this one too.
Ted, I lied to you. I hired you because I wanted this team to lose. I wanted you to fail. And I sabotaged you every chance I've had. It was me who hired that photographer to take the photo of you and Keeley. I set up the interview with Trent Krim, hoping that he would humiliate you. And I instigated the transfer of Jamie Tart, even though you'd asked me not to. This club is all that Rupert has ever cared about, and I wanted to destroy it. To cause him as much pain and suffering as he has caused me. And I didn't care who I used or who I hurt. All you good people just trying to make a difference. Ted, I'm so sorry. If you want to quit or call the press, I'll completely understand.
I forgive you.
You what? Why?
Divorce is hard. It doesn't matter if you're the one leaving or if you're the one who got left. It makes folks do crazy things. Well, I'm coaching soccer, for heaven's sake, in London. I mean, that's nuts. Yeah. But this job you gave me has changed my life. It gave me the distance I needed to see what was really going on. Yeah, but you and me, we're okay. Come on, just shake this hand. My arm's starting to get weak. You know, I think that if you care about someone and you got a little love in your heart, there ain't nothing you can't get through together. You know what I'm saying?
You're not just talking about us now, are you?
Maybe. Maybe not.
Okay.
I'm gonna go change for practice, training, practice, whatever. Who cares? Nice seeing you down here, boss. You liven up the place.
What I love about the show and about this book, but particularly the show, I think it's rare, is that that scene doesn't end with much of a laugh. Comedies are often pure comedies, and some joke will end up sort of spoiling the moment. What's beautiful about Ted Lasso is that, as Jason Sudeikis says earlier on, our lives are a drama, a tragedy, and a comedy. And we try to reflect that in the show. And that's what it is. And I would say the same is true of Trollope, who his biographer calls primarily a comic writer, but the book has so many touching moments. And the series, the Barsetshire Chronicles, is well worth your time. It really is. Six books. And the beauty of being retired, and this is why I've waited, there are 47 Anthony Trollope novels. 47. Jeff, how many do you have?
28.
Yeah, I think I've got 13 or 14, and I'm number 9 right now. And there are 3 episodes of Ted Lasso.
3 seasons.
3 seasons, sorry. And while I was desperately hoping for a 4th season, it clearly was meant to be a 3-season sort of novel. Kind of like, now that I think of it, all of Trollope's novels came out in multiple volumes, 1, 2, and 3, and that's sort of what Ted Lasso is. 3 seasons, but 1 real story. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah.
Really don't have much time, but if there is a question, we have 3 minutes.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Also, I brought a few of the, Mark and I brought a few Trollope books for you to peruse on the table there, but does anybody, we've still got a couple minutes. Yes. Our Trollope reader. Yes.
I am the
Yes.
fangirl. Anyhow, I just wanted to ask if anybody has looked to see it. There is a 3-part BBC of the Barsetshire Chronicles and a 6-part The Pallisers. That they're back from the early 70s. I mean, I don't know. Well, the production quality is the 70s, but the story is the story, and the characters are beautifully portrayed. Really good acting. I think they'd be worth finding. We used to have them, but we all got rid of our DVDs
Right, the technology,
and don't have them anymore.
Yeah.
But I bet they're streaming somewhere if we found them. And I would really, because the characters from the Barsetshire Chronicles carry over, not all of them, a few. There's that thread that carries over in the Pallisers is really powerful. Lots of
Politics.
all the
and
things,
such.
all the things you guys talked about.
Thanks so much.
I've seen Dr. Thorne, which is one of the Barsetshire books as a BBC. It was a 2-part series. Yeah, and it was fine, but it's nothing compared to reading the books, I think.
Great to
yeah. We are evangelists at heart for Trollope and Ted Lasso. So if you walk out of here encouraged to read Trollope, start with the Warden.
Yeah.
Start with the Warden and then read Barsetshire Towers.
And often the Warden comes together with Barsetshire Towers. You'll find them in 1 volume often, but they're the first 2 of 6.
Here's my copy of the Warden. It is definitely not as nice as some of the others that I have. It's fallen apart, but they're just fantastic. I think that's it, Doug. Oh no, 1 more. We've got time for 1 more.
Well, I'm just really curious if the 2 of you like both those things, Trollope and Ted Lasso, so much that you've made this correlation, or have you read it elsewhere? Because it's brilliant.
It is this man right here whose demented mind came up with this connection.
Conversation at breakfast.
When I get
he
to be a
said,
fan,
yes.
Ted Lasso
Yes,
reminds me of
yeah.
Trollope.
Russ is on the south side.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that happens at Russ's.
You could put this show on the road.
I get
Yeah.
fanatical about things, and when I like 2 things a lot, I think they have to have something in common. So fortunately, these did, and he helped me find those. So
For me,
Go for it.
there's so many quips and quotes and jokes that Ted tells over the series. Mark didn't want to indicate what the fans were saying when he arrived, but they would say wanker, wanker, wanker.
You didn't hear that from us.
Yeah, no, you heard it from me. And Ted's son is there
oh yeah,
a season later, and here's the fans calling him a wanker. And he asked his dad what a wanker is, and Ted says, well, it's a man who likes to be alone with his thoughts.
I love it. Yeah.
Just,
go ahead.
just briefly in regard to the crowd reaction, and particularly the people in the bar, to me, they're kind of parallel with the men in Hiram's hospital, because they are very, they at times they love you, but they're very fickle, and they can be turned on a dime and become your best fan or your worst enemy.
Yeah.
See, if this were a class, I'd be assigning an essay right now, which
Yeah.
would be find at least 5 more parallels between these 2 stories, and you've
Yeah.
already indicated.
And,
one that I never
really,
thought of.
really one of the points that Trollope makes is that those are the real losers in the end. They're the ones that lose. Yeah. Eventually, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
But those men are left, they have less income because Mr. Harding's income is taken from them. They have no warden. The place is sadder. Their lives aren't any better. As Dr. Grantley said to them, I could keep going, but Dr. Grantley says to them early on, Hiram's will was intended to provide for your care, which it has done. It was never intended to make you gentlemen. And so they dream of wealth. 11 of the 12 do, and they never get it. Their lot is never changed, which is also part of the commentary Trollope makes. But I could keep going, but we're out of time. So
thanks so much.
Thank you on a cold and snowy morning for coming. Feel free to peruse the books. A bunch of big things. I think that's a bunch of big books with him once to a church, and a woman walks up and picks up my first